So then you get more into the philosophical aspect of things. Why should the human being deserve human rights? From a religious perspective, right, you can say it's because it has a soul, made in God's image, right? The Ten Commandments say not to kill, anything. There's lots of reasons. Perfectly fine. But as we said before, if you don't believe in God or the soul, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So you have to wonder from a secular perspective why you should care if why should human life have value? And actually now we're like skirting on the edge of this rather gargantuan philosophical debate completely transcending abortion about why an atheist would care if people die. And there's no way we have time to talk about all of it tonight. But I will say that if the pro-choice movement started saying, you know what, abortion is justified because human life doesn't matter, that would be fine with me, because I think they would completely cease to exist. Because most people, regardless of their religious affiliation, agree that human beings should have human rights. We agree that we want to live in a society where human beings should have human rights, even if not everyone can articulate it the exact way, and I argue that a lot of people can, but even if they couldn't. So that still leaves the question of why the fetus should have the same human rights as other people, from a secular perspective. And there are several arguments for why this makes sense, but I'm just going to talk to you about my favorite. Don Marquis wrote an article called Why Abortion is Immoral, in which he basically said that the reason killing is wrong is because you're depriving the person you kill of all future experiences. And I included a link to the article in the sources. It's 10 pages, it's free. You should read it, it's really interesting. But he talks about why he thinks this definition makes the most sense, and he has several different reasons that don't really have to do with the abortion debate, but just explain why he thinks that's why it seems the society thinks killing is wrong. And he says, if that is why we think killing is wrong, because it deprives the person you killed of all possible future experiences, then that would apply to the fetus as much as the newborn, because we're talking about their future experiences, right? Not in the moment. It's like I was saying, I mentioned to Neil before you guys showed up, we were talking about how I've heard pro-choicers say, if my mother had aborted me, I wouldn't care because I wouldn't know the difference, which maybe they feel that way, maybe they don't, whatever. But that doesn't really make any sense. You could be asleep, I could shoot you in the head, you wouldn't know, right? And it still makes a difference. The reason it makes a difference, at least from a secular perspective, is because I've taken away everything that was going to be yours, good or bad. It doesn't matter, it's yours. And that applies to the fetus as much as anyone else. So Don Marquis argues that therefore abortion is immoral, even if you don't believe in an afterlife. And actually, he goes so far as to say, even if you don't believe the fetus is a person, it doesn't matter, because as a human entity, it has future experiences, or as he puts it, a future like ours. So that's one reason that you might, from a secular perspective, feel that it's still wrong. Now, I'm going to talk about a third point that I didn't mention before, and before I even show you what it is, I feel like I really want to stress this for anybody who will listen to me. A lot of times when I talk about abortion, I'll say things like, I think the fetus should have human rights, and people will say very bizarre things like, why do you hate women, or sex, or whatever, why do you want to control people's bodies, all sorts of terrible things. And it's really frustrating because they're not listening to what I'm saying. They're just thinking about what they think I'm saying and then just responding. That's irritating, right? The problem is, I see other pro-lifers, my fellow pro-lifers, secular or otherwise, do this all the time. Because the pro-choice movement will say, you know, the fetus has human rights, and then they'll say, okay, but even a full-fledged person can't use your body against your will. And then we'll say, whatever, you just don't think the fetus matters. And we're not listening, okay? And it's important, because this is, in my opinion, definitely the strongest pro-choice argument. You can completely accept that the fetus is a human being and a person, and might merit some rights, but not the right to use your body against your will. And I feel like pro-lifers often sort of avoid this conversation because it's complicated and it's difficult. It's a compelling argument for anybody on the fence who hasn't already taken a side. They think this is interesting, okay? Interesting might not be the right word. They think, you know the phrase personally pro-life? You're pro-life, but you wouldn't want to put your decision on other people. A lot of times, people are personally pro-life, politically pro-choice because of this. Because they can't bring themselves to do what they basically feel is enslaving hundreds of thousands of women, okay? And a lot of times, pro-life will respond to this by saying, oh, well, yes, bodily integrity is important, but we feel the right to life should trump bodily integrity because without the right to life, you can't have bodily integrity. So what's the point? And that's a nice thought, but it's not true for society in general, okay? In general, our society actually nobody declares this necessarily, well, pro-choicers do, but it's not like a societal declaration, but we function as a society with bodily integrity, trumping the right to life all the time. So the center picture is just an artist's depiction of a violinist, but I put it up there because, and forgive me if you've heard this before, Judith Jarvis Thompson in, I think, 1971, so before even Roe v. Wade, did an article called Defense of Abortion. And it's kind of long, but basically she asked you to do this thought experiment. You're walking along, minding your own business, one day someone knocks you out, and you wake up in the hospital, and your circulatory system is attached to this violinist. Apparently he has some kind of fatal disease, and he's using you as human dialysis. I don't know why, right? In the thought experiment, you're the only one who can save him, just let it go. And he didn't do this to you. A crazy society of music lovers who love this violinist knocked you out and hooked you up to him, but if you stay hooked up to him for 9 months, you'll be cured, and you can both go on your merry way. If you disconnect, he'll die. And of course then, the author, Thompson, is like, so legally should you be allowed to disconnect? What about morally? And then you're left to think about that. Okay? We don't have to use crazy thought experiments to think about that. People die every day waiting for organ transplants, right? Some people in really sad situations also die of bone marrow transplants, or they need blood transfusions, they don't have the right type, and yet all of us, presumably, hopefully, healthy people here are not required by law to donate blood or bone marrow, which regenerates. Livers regenerate. We each have 2 kidneys. Some people could really use one of them, and if you want to donate it, that's really sweet. But you don't have to, because your bodily integrity trumps their right to life, okay? This is an important point. I put a picture of a car crash up here because I think it's another good analogy. We risk the possibility of crashing into someone every time we drive, okay? And if you did crash into someone who was totally innocent, didn't do anything, you screwed up, you know, whatever, you ran a red light, and you crashed into them, and they're lying on the side of the road dying, and they need blood, it'd be really nice if you wanted to donate, but you still don't have to. You will get in trouble in other ways, but they don't make you donate blood, because bodily integrity is really important. And in fact, these are all hypotheticals. I actually have a concrete example. In 1978, McFall v. Shimp. So this guy named McFall had a bone marrow disease, and his cousin was a match, Shimp. And Shimp, for reasons I don't even know, didn't want to donate the bone marrow. So McFall sued him. And McFall was going to die, okay? And it's hard to find a bone marrow match, especially from someone not related to you, because it's a painful procedure. And he sued him to say he should have to donate, and the court ruled against McFall. And they said that they found Shimp's refusal to donate, quote, morally indefensible. So they agreed that he should, right? It's terrible that he's not. This guy's going to die because he won't. And it's a painful procedure, but then it regenerates and you're fine. But they said, quote, for a society which respects the rights of one individual to sink its teeth into the jugular vein or neck of one of its members and suck from it sustenance for another member is revolting to our hard-wrought concepts of jurisprudence. So they thought morally he should definitely do it, and legally he definitely shouldn't have to. And the reason I bring up all of these things is not to say that this is analogous to pregnancy, because obviously I'm pro-life still, even though I totally recognize the importance of bodily integrity. I'm not trying to say that all of these perfectly fit the situation. In fact, I'm going to tell you why they don't. But I'm telling you about them because bodily integrity is an important aspect of this debate. And I feel like pro-lifers most of the time kind of avoid it, and they shouldn't, because it's not just important to pro-choicers, it's important to all of us. Frankly, I don't think that you should be forced to donate your kidney, even though there's probably somebody dying that needs a kidney right now, because it is important. So, that being said, I don't think it's really enough to justify abortion. So, there's several aspects of the previous examples I just gave you that don't quite cover the uniqueness of this situation. I think the most important one is that 99% of abortions are done on pregnancies that were the result of consensual sex. And this matters because that means even if you use birth control, because there's no, even getting your tubes tied has a 0.3% of conception, okay? And condoms, the pill, more common methods, much higher, okay? If you want to use birth control, if you're going to have sex, then fine, great. I hope you don't get pregnant if you don't want to be pregnant. But there's always a chance that you could get pregnant, and this is a known thing. You're consenting to the possibility that another life will depend on you. So imagine in this ship, the cousins with the bone marrow, imagine if the guy who didn't want to donate had taken some action that he knew might give his cousin this fatal disease, and the cousin got the fatal disease, and then he was like, sucks, dude. It's not my problem, you know? That's different. That's completely different. Or the violinist analogy. Instead of you walking down the street and getting hit on the head randomly, what if you took some action that you knew might make the violinist really sick? Okay? It's different. It might not be different enough to justify forcing you to donate, but it's still an important factor to consider, a huge factor. It's not just that you consent to the risk, you're responsible for the fact that their life is at stake. Okay? That's a pretty big component. And it's not the only one. Pregnancy is especially unique because not only is their life dependent on you for at least the first parts of pregnancy, for most of the pregnancy, that woman's body is the only body that can sustain this life. So with the car crash analogy, you know, we have an entire infrastructure of blood banks and organ donation centers in the hopes that even when people do get hurt, somebody somewhere can help them. But with pregnancy, you're the only one. And so that's different too. Imagine if you crashed your car and you knew when you went out driving that if you crashed your car, the person would die unless you gave your body. It's hard to picture that, it's kind of weird, but it would be pretty different. I would be a lot more hesitant about driving right away. And then the other big thing is that, of course, and I think this matters a lot, this happens all the time. There's somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million abortions a year in this country. Okay? And that means that that's not all the unplanned pregnancies, just the ones that chose to abort. There's even more than that. Imagine if you knew that by driving a car, you were going to get into a fatal car wreck every year, and your body was the only one that could save the other person. I mean, that's pretty extreme. I don't know if our laws would be completely unaffected by such a bizarre and extreme circumstance. And that's kind of what we're talking about with this. I totally understand that there are a lot of people who don't think that's enough. Bodily integrity should trump those reasons. I totally understand that. I just think that there are factors worth considering. Obviously, for me, they're enough. But in any case, I think it's important that we make the argument. At least put it out there for people to hear that this is not such a simple, straightforward case as I don't have to donate blood, right? Anyway, so that, in a nutshell, is the secular position. This is my boyfriend and me at one of the Walks for Life before we had the cool big banner. And we would love it to have anybody and everybody join us. Like I said before, we have lots of religious people in our group that just use secular arguments. We could walk together at the walk next year, and we like to have people just in our group to kind of keep us sharp and keep us with new information and to share arguments. So we would love it if you came and found us, Facebook, whatever. But that pretty much takes care of it for me. So are there any questions?